Think forward. Think Research Channel.
In June of 2006, the U.S. Surgeon General wrote a very definitive report on involuntary exposure to secondhand smoke, and what he said, which we've known for years, but he just made it definitive, is that secondhand smoke kills people. It's the third leading cause of preventable death in this country.
What a lot of people don't know is in a small room, it can only take one cigarette to well surpass hazardous levels of outdoor standards set by the EPA.
There's plenty of money to be made out there for all of us, but with that money comes the obligation to do it the right way. You can't make people sick while you're making your money.
I'd have 200 compliments to every complaint, and the few that said they would never eat here again are still eating here.
Lexington was the first community in Kentucky to pass such a ban. It made some stir because Lexington was the biggest early tobacco market in the country before the ban was passed.
We're right in the middle of tobacco country, where tobacco farms literally helped build this community.
So my goals to my research are really to make Kentucky a better place and to make quality of life better for Kentuckians. And since tobacco is the single most preventable cause of death in Kentucky and the United States as a whole, our goal really, well, we had a great opportunity here in Lexington, because when Lexington went smoke-free in April of 2004, that's when it actually went into effect. We had a great natural experiment to study the effects of this law, both from a health standpoint and an economic standpoint, because the College of Nursing and many of our colleagues here in Lexington were very involved in the whole effort here to educate the public and our policymakers about secondhand smoke and its harmful effects, and then what we as a community could do about it.
2 years ago, I met Dr. Hahn. We talked about a position that she had that was funded through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to work with communities regarding secondhand smoke issues and smoke-free policy at the local level, and it sounded like a really good fit.
Okay. I'm Mike Scanlon. I'm the president of Thomas & King. We are a restaurant company that owns 90 Applebee's and 7 Johnny Carino's restaurants. It started out as an unholy marriage. Dr. Hahn and I were both on a study group that did some pre-studies for Lexington before the smoking ban behavior, before the ordinance got started. And I came to that neither for it or against it. I knew it wouldn't hurt business. And what she knew that I didn't know is there was the scientific evidence that it hurts people.
I became interested in tobacco policy research really through my collaboration with Dr. Hahn. She and I didn't really know that much about it before I started working with her, but then as I became more and more involved in her projects, it became an interest area of mine also.
There was a group in Lexington called Lexington Health United that started as a result of the economic development process here in Fayette County. And they had gotten together all of the major hospitals and the CEOs and the dean of the medical school and the head of the then School of Public Health at UK. And they had talked around the table about doing something together as a kind of a mutual effort. And so the idea was brought forth that they should do something related to tobacco. And so they invited me in to give a presentation, and I did, and with a colleague of mine from the health department. And we had looked at the literature, because I'd been doing research in this for a long time, and I said, if you really want to do something that's going to impact this community, you might want to consider moving toward a smoke-free law. You always have a research hypothesis, and it's always based on other studies. So you go into a research process with a hypothesis or an expectation of what you're going to find. And in most of the studies we did on Smoke-Free Lexington, there had been studies like that done around the country. So I did have hypotheses that did ring true. In other words, we did find what we were expecting to find, if you will. But when I say expecting, I don't mean from a bias standpoint. I mean expecting from a research hypothesis standpoint. One group that is disproportionately affected by secondhand smoke exposure is the workforce. And people who are working specifically in the food service or hospitality industries. Those are the people that are specifically at risk for this dangerous substance.
It's just like if I suggested to you, I have 2 cups of water, 1 clean, 1 dirty. Which one do you want to drink? Well, one could give you multiple diseases, and we know it, and you would choose the clean water. Just as our body needs clean water, we need clean air to breathe.
You know, I wasn't always an advocate for smoke-free environments. And what made me do it voluntarily was I got handed scientific, undebatable, non-arguable facts that secondhand smoke was poisoning our employees. And I felt, and the other shareholders of the company felt, that we don't have the right to let our employees get sick while we're making all the money. So it was just dead level black and white facts.
We recruited over 100 restaurant and bar workers in Lexington 3 to 4 months before the law went into effect in April of '04. We randomly chose restaurants and bars in Lexington. So we took the list from the health department, because the health department knows everybody who has a retail food code license, and we randomly chose restaurants and bars. And then we sent letters to the owner managers to say, we're doing this study. We would love to come in and just recruit your workers, 2 or 3 per venue, to be in our study. And we were really pleased. I mean, the restaurant owners and bar owners were extremely supportive and willing, to let us come into their venues.
The way that you do it is to cut someone's hair like really close to where their scalp is, and that hair that's closest to their scalp shows their most recent exposure to nicotine, either through being a tobacco user themselves or through experiencing it in secondhand smoke.
And so you cut a little piece of hair from the back of the scalp and just merely cut the hair, put it in an envelope, and then we sent it off to a laboratory to get it tested.
There's a lab in New Zealand actually that is able to take the hair and quantify the amount of nicotine that is in it.
Then we also had them fill out a survey, and we asked them things like if they smoked and how much they smoked and how much secondhand smoke they were exposed to at the home and other workplaces, because a lot of these people have more than one job, so we would ask them all of that. We did that 3 months before the law. Then we did the very, very same thing 3 months after the law was in effect with the very same cohort of restaurant and bar workers, and we cut their hair again. We did expect some drop, but we really didn't expect such a large drop, and that was about a 56% drop. And even after we controlled for or adjusted for the fact that we had smokers in the sample, it didn't seem to matter. We still had a large drop, and we found that workers were being protected by this law. We could then estimate that those workers would be less at risk for developing disease as a result of being exposed at work.
The primary goals of the studies that are probably the most commonly known that we've done are to look at how tobacco policy links to public opinion of tobacco policy, and also health behaviors like quitting smoking or a lower smoking rate, that type of thing. So it's the link between the policy that is in place in terms of smoke-free law, and then what are the health outcomes associated with that. In all of these studies, actually, I'm the statistician. So I take the raw data, if you will, whether it's measurement of hair nicotine or public opinion data or whatever the data is. And I take that raw data and analyze it in terms of determining whether there's a significant finding or not.
So how do you take these large pieces of information and pull out just one or two pieces that really a community is interested in? One way we do that is through the public opinion polls.
The public opinion studies that we've done, we've actually done two. We did one in Lexington where we collected public opinion data before the smoke-free law was implemented, and then sometime after the law was implemented to find out if there was a change in sentiment, between the pre-period was actually during a time that the public knew that the law was going to be implemented, but before it actually was. And then the post obviously was after the law was implemented.
Dr. Ron Langley from the UK Survey Research Center has been a tremendous partner with us, because the Survey Research Center is in the business of surveying the public about a whole host of things, and they do it every day, and they know how to do it, and they know how to pick samples that are representative of a community. So we had them randomly choose over 1,000 Fayette County adults before the law went into effect, and then about 6 months after the law went into effect. And so they did the work, they did all the surveys, and then gave us the data set to look at and to analyze.
What we were looking for was to see what was public sentiment in terms of the acceptability of the law, first before it was actually in place and then afterwards. And we found actually that there was an increase in the level of acceptability of the law once it was implemented, that it was almost like people were kind of apprehensive about it maybe, or kind of didn't know what to expect when the law, before it was implemented, but then once it was in place, they realized that, either it wasn't a big deal or it was actually a positive for them.
We had a significant jump up in public opinion, or people favoring the law, and that's really consistent with studies all over the country that have shown that people like smoke-free laws. They're leery about them at first. Some people have a lot of myth and misperception about what they're going to do and what they mean, but the reality is that's not what we found. People like them. They really didn't change their social practices. We asked, if they went to bars before the smoke-free law, did they go to bars after the smoke-free law? And we found that they did. They really didn't change their practices. They went just as much as they went before. And so those data were really important, and they kind of were consistent then with our next study, which was doing an economic impact study to find out exactly what was going on in the restaurants and bars in Lexington. A lot of the general public and business owners are afraid of these laws because you hear people say that they're going to go out of business, and they're worried about their business as a result of these laws. And they're very real. Those feelings and worries feel very real at the time. But what's important, how research can contribute and has contributed to this, is that we took a very planned, deliberate approach to look at what happened in Lexington. And as I mentioned, I collaborated with my colleagues at the Gatton School of Business, and they did all of the economic analysis, and I feel very good that they did a very good, thorough job.
Our focus is mainly on bars, restaurants, and hotels, because people who think there might be an impact think those are the business segments that are most likely to be affected. I think it's pretty common knowledge that people who do smoke, when they go out to eat or when they go to a bar, like to have a cigarette along with their meal and with their drinks. Now, one thing we were curious about, and we kind of emphasized this in the publication that came out of this research in a journal called Tobacco Control, is that Lexington and Kentucky itself has an above average number of smokers compared to national data. So one might have started with an argument, gee, if smoking is really something that's heavily engaged in here, you might expect to find an impact in Lexington, whereas you wouldn't find it in other places. Of course, that turned out not to be the case. So if there was anything a little different about our study, it is that we were dealing with a population in which the percentage of smokers was larger than in most other studies. Most of the time you find people looking at employment for a very simple reason. You can't get sales data. What you would really like to see is what restaurant sales are. But that, again, you would have to get that from the restaurants. They're not willing to report it, and you can't get sales at an individual firm level from any government source. Given that you would like to have sales and you can't get it, where do you turn next? Well, almost always people turn to employment. The logic is that employment and sales are correlated. So if my sales are going up 10, 15, 20% a year, I probably need to add employees at a rate of approximately 10, 15, or 20% a year. To use statistical language, sales and employment are correlated very highly. And what we found was that in general, the presence of the smoking ordinance didn't seem to have either a positive or negative effect on business activity. Abstracting from all these other things, we actually did find that employment tended to go up after the implementation of the smoking ordinance, but that was really as a result of factors other than the smoking ordinance itself.
The hospitality industry is an up and down industry. It's very seasonal. You have ups and downs, and that's normal. And so we looked at those ups and downs for 5 years before the law and 20 months after the law, and my colleagues were able to analyze that data, and we found basically that restaurant employment, which is what we call a proxy for restaurant employment, is a proxy for revenues, if you will. In other words, the economic health of a business. We found that employment in restaurants increased by about 400 additional employees per month. So that was a positive effect. When we looked at bars, there was no change in employment. That really stayed stable over the time period.
We learned over the years in cities that made us go smoke-free, it didn't hurt business. We knew that for a fact. We knew it wasn't going to hurt business. But there was really no reason to change. Well, it doesn't hurt business, doesn't help business, just leave it alone. Once we had that fact base that it really does hurt employees, there were other business owners who didn't get that. So they didn't understand why I was so firm about doing it. And then after we got it done, they saw it didn't really hurt anything, and they were more willing to join it.
People ask me all the time, well then if it's so bad, why doesn't OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in Washington, why don't they do something about it? Why don't they just ban smoking in all workplaces? People ask me that all the time. Well, it's easier said than done, because we have mounds of research now looking at the tobacco documents, knowing that the tobacco industry has deliberately worked for years and years to fight smoke-free regulations, and they do it at all levels, and they have a lot more power. Obviously in Washington they have pretty much power in the State House, but they have less power at the local level. And so it's really best, our research has really pointed to the value of having local governments and local people educate each other about this problem, and then to take strategies at the local level to restrict smoking so that people aren't affected.
A couple of weeks ago, I was in Danville, Kentucky, speaking to their council about smoke-free. It was a very civilized debate. People had points this way, people had points that way. It was very civilized. So as time goes on, the debate becomes much more civil, but it's still passionate. People still feel strongly about their personal rights. People still feel strongly that it's a legal product, I ought to be able to do whatever I want to with it. And when you're used to hearing that and you have a logical reply for that, and you have some place smart to take them, allowing the debate to occur for them to make their point and for them to hear the counterpoint, eventually most people jump on board. And the easiest way to get people to jump on board is to take them to a city that is smoke-free and see that it's still vibrant, it's doing better than it ever was, the restaurants and the public places all feel better.
When I moved here, I realized suddenly that life was different when you cross the river, and that there was a lot of need here, given our tradition of growing tobacco in Kentucky. And I saw the tremendous economic and health burden here. People were very sick and still are very sick from using tobacco. And as a public health nurse, I just saw it as a wonderful way to study the issue and to contribute to the health of Kentuckians. The air quality studies are really interesting because we have to do them with a small machine. It's about this big, not very big at all, and we just put it in a backpack or a purse, and we go into venues in the community in which we're testing, and usually choose venues, 10 to 12 to 15 venues per community, and they're restaurants, bars, bowling alleys, bingo halls, wherever the community folks really want to go and collect the data.
There are air quality monitors that can actually capture the particulate matter in the air at different levels.
When somebody smokes, there's a lot of particulate matter, fine particulate matter that comes out of the burning end of the cigarette, and those are very small. You can't see them. You can't really smell them per se, but you know when somebody's smoking you can smell it, but sometimes when you think you can't smell it, they're still there because they're so small, and those very small fine particles get lodged into the lung and cause the health problems we know come from secondhand smoke. And what I always say is if you pull a hair out of your head and slice it 100 ways, long ways, one of those tiny slices would be the size of a fine particle. And so these things can only be measured by this side pack monitor that we use. And that's a science in that we've calibrated that, we maintain those machines, and we're sure that they're accurate in measuring air pollution. We train people to collect data about the venue, how large the restaurant or bar or bingo hall is, how many people how many burning cigarettes there are during the time that they're there. They stay about 50 minutes, don't stay too long, and collect data while they're there. There are many times, you know, if they're in a bingo hall, they'll play bingo, or if they're in a restaurant, they'll order something to eat.
We do train individuals at the local community level, and we teach them how to collect the data. We make sure that when we train the individuals at the community level, they follow this certain protocol, so we know we're getting valid, scientific, evidence-based data at the local level.
The whole goal of collecting air quality studies is to merely document the air pollution that's caused by the burning end of a cigarette, and then if a community passes a law, like in Georgetown, we use the data to show how much better it often is, and we found that in many communities already. And in Lexington, we found a 91% drop in these fine particle air pollution levels, which is huge. And also in Georgetown, we found immediate drop. We went in day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 after their law took effect to the same venues and found an immediate and sustaining drop, up to 85 to 90% better air quality in those venues. And so that really fits with the other studies we've done, like the hair nicotine study, because when we asked restaurant and bar workers how they felt, even within 3 months after a law passed here in Lexington, by and large, they all said, whether they smoked or not, that they felt better, they weren't coughing less, they had fewer colds, they could breathe better, they had fewer headaches. They just generally physically reported that they felt better. And then, of course, we also found a 56% drop in hair nicotine, regardless of whether they smoked or not, within 3 months after that law went into effect.
When we went smoke-free, a lot of things inside our restaurants changed. Within a couple of days, they felt cleaner and were cleaner. And you couldn't really, if you didn't know what had happened, you wouldn't know why. The air was fresher, the tables were easier to clean. We also eliminated the wait at the front door, some people waiting for smoking, some people waiting for non-smoking. We were able to seat people a lot quicker. And also our restaurants, our seating sections in the restaurant all became valuable again.
Kentucky now has several communities that have some sort of smoke-free law. Lexington started the ball rolling in '04, and now we have several communities that have had, passed some sort of laws.
We compared Fayette County to 30 control counties and found out that before Lexington's law, they were comparable in terms of smoking rate. But after Lexington's law, the Fayette County was significantly lower in smoking prevalence than the 30 control counties.
And we found in Lexington that we had a 32% decline in the percent of adults who were smokers after the law took effect. About 16,500 people became non-smokers as a result of our law. So we know that about half of the smokers want to quit. We know that. It's about 50% of smokers have tried and have not succeeded. And so for those people who are interested and motivated in quitting, smoke-free laws actually turn out to be a strategy that's pretty effective for those folks. So that's kind of one of those value added. It's not really the reason why communities pass smoke-free laws, because they do it really to reduce the harm from secondhand smoke, but as a result, people are, it's easier for people to put it down when they can't smoke everywhere. As a result of that decline in Lexington, we estimate that we saved about $21 million a year from smoking-related costs. Kentucky spends about $1.17 billion, not million, but billion dollars a year treating sick smokers. And that's an incredible number. I mean, people think about the economics of smoke-free laws, and they think of, you know, worrying about putting people out of business, which, by the way, is a myth, but what they don't think about is all the money we spend taking care of people after they get sick from years and years of smoking. So these laws can obviously save money, but they can also make life a little bit better for people who live in those communities.
One of the rewarding things about looking at these studies having to do with tobacco control and tobacco policy is being able to see, you know, firsthand what some of the positive health benefits are to something as seemingly simple as having a smoke-free law and limiting secondhand smoke exposure.
A smoke-free ordinance, on the face of it, appears to get into people's personal rights until you understand you're making people sick that are smelling it. Once you have that evidence, it changes. You know, New York City did not fold when it went smoke-free. Ireland did not collapse as a country when it went smoke-free. All that history and all that data coming to the table make it a lot easier than it used to be. So as hard as it was, it's still hard, but it's not near the negative energy around it that it used to be. People are much more accepting, and the people who want it have a lot more energy than they used to because they can see the results and they like them.
You can see that I'm very passionate about the research I do because it truly makes a difference, and it has made a difference because I think as policymakers have looked at our data in other communities as well as here in Lexington, I think it has helped them make informed decisions about what to do next. And so to me it's very satisfying that policymakers and advocates in other communities can look at our data and find use out of them. That's why we do it. You know, we want to make Kentucky a better place.
Think Forward. Think Research Channel.